So Howard Schwartz, why don't you come on up, tell us a little about yourself, and kick off the presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. So welcome everyone. Thanks again for coming. My name is Howard Schwartz, and along with Mark and Joe, I'm a co-founder and I'm the CEO of Crowded.com. I am a serial entrepreneur. Mark and I founded together two mobile ad technology companies that we exited from, that Joe was a lead investor and an advisor for. I actually grew up with Joe, and we did Funding Post together back in '01. So it's a team that I'm very proud to work with again for the third time. I'm also an active investor, mostly focused on the East Coast. I'm an LP in about a dozen venture funds and have sometimes too many direct angel investments when I look back at it.
He's been banned from any future angel investment.
Yeah, because what I do is I do it in between. So when I'm actually managing a company, Mark doesn't allow me to do angel investments, and then after we exit, then I'm allowed to do some more. So it goes in waves. So as Mark and Joe mentioned, we hosted a very similar roundtable in New York back in July. And I'm very interested to hear some of the differences in the market. I know that there's a lot of sort of macro conversations in the differences between East Coast and West Coast in investment. Obviously here we're focused on demand tonight and really kind of focused on the platform side. So I'm going to try to deliver this research. Unfortunately, the gentleman who did the research, Evan Neufeld, who is just absolutely brilliant from storyline development, actually conducted the research study for us this summer. He presented it in New York, but he was not able to be here tonight, so I will try my best. I'm going to go fairly quickly. We do have some handouts, so we have this this pretty kind of front and back. This is an infographic that we publish as a summary, and I believe there's some copies of the deck for you to have any notes. Any questions, just call them out during. Again, this is really meant to be really interactive, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. So when we think about the on-demand economy, Crowded's focus is really on what we call the independent worker, and that's really just sort of our label for it, and you'll hear that consistently used in this presentation. So we're going to talk about why we're here, really the emergence of that independent worker economy, really the key trends from our research. So this is a stat that we borrowed from our friends at Upwork. So this is really what we think is the overall opportunity that we can tackle as an industry together. So 55 million freelancers in the US, a third of the US workforce. And this number is much larger than Intuit's recent number, which talked about maybe 3.5 million or so without kind of looking at that stat live, of on-demand workers growing to maybe 10 or 12 million over the next few years. So we really look at that middle ground between that 3.5 million today, which is fairly millennial heavy, which makes a lot of sense for ride sharing, delivery, and really towards this 55 million, which in the freelance economy also may be very highly skilled workers. And we really see that spread between the 3.5 million and 55 million as the opportunity, not only that we're focused on in Crowded, but really as the industry as a whole that we can tackle. And we do spend a lot of time thinking about both skilled and unskilled workforce. So the emergence of the independent worker, again, not my slide, that's Evan's slide. So again, we wanted to understand the benchmarks and the drivers and really what is in the mind of the independent worker today. Evan and Storyline surveyed over 1,000 freelancers across key age and gender cohorts during the summer, and they asked over 40 questions to really understand their usage and views. And the results is basically we segmented them, and we're going to present the highlights this evening. So our key consumer segments for the worker, when we talk about consumers here, this is a worker-focused study. And it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, again, Evan's slide. So far, and again, this is really early. This is, I don't know, maybe the second inning at this point for all of us. So what we thought was very important is really only 2 in 10 of the freelancers, the independent workers that we surveyed were disappointed in the market. But what's really interesting, and you're going to see this as a trend throughout our presentation, is 25% of them are not there yet. And we started looking at that and saying, why are they so unsure? Do they not have enough data? And I think the more, this was, again, a quantitative study. So really the more qualitative research that we've done, we just hosted a few weeks ago in our office in New York, a meetup with workers from a dozen different platforms. We're going to do it again in San Francisco in about a month. And what's interesting is that the majority of them have only been working with these platforms for sometimes a matter of days or weeks. The Uber that we took over here, the guys worked there for 10 days. And again, maybe the trends are a little bit different here in San Francisco. I think Mark might talk a little bit about that and ask some questions about worker retention and churn. And in New York, the average delivery person, sometimes we order 3 or 4 things a day to interview the workers. They've been here for 3 days. Someone's been there for 3 weeks. Every now and then I get an Uber driver that's or a Lyft driver that's been working for a year. It's really interesting, short tenure. So I think that tells us the I'm not there yet. I don't think there's an issue. I think that it's actually, this is really so new, and again, we're in the second inning. And overall, we're happy to say that they're psyched. They're really excited about the opportunity. So when we look at the difference between psyched and disappointed, it's really the more gigs that they have, the more platforms that they work for, and the more tenure, the longer that they've been involved in the freelance or the on-demand economy, the happier that they are. So that's actually a really positive sign for us. So we start to move from the people who are unsure to psyched when we actually can, 1, treat them the right way, 2, give them a good experience, and 3, just more time in the market. So money obviously talks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but differences between sort of white collar and blue collar, and we think about sort of skilled and unskilled labor, and we don't mean that in a negative way at all. And what I thought was really interesting is if you look here at ride sharing, this unsure number 10%, right? So this really kind of perplexed us again from the quantitative data. It's sometimes hard to glean it. So when we followed up with qualitative research and sort of these focus groups and meetups with the workers, is again, this is just a lack of time in the industry, which is very interesting. First, we thought that they're just not getting what's going on, or maybe they're in the middle and unhappy. They just haven't spent enough time. So again, some of the researchers here, and if anyone would like to see the actual data behind this, we're happy to share that. Just let me know. So again, money talks, and when we start thinking about skilled, unskilled, white versus white collar versus blue collar. So this makes a lot of sense. The more money that you make, the happier that you are. And if we start to think about where the on-demand economy is today, sort of in this middle ground, this $15 to $25 an hour range, it's kind of interesting that the jump here and the responses. So again, when we start to think about some of the skilled opportunities and that 55 million freelance number, it's pretty exciting. So what are the goals? What are they trying to accomplish? This was, I think, an obvious one. They want to make money, they want to maximize revenue and utilize the time and the assets they have. Maintaining work-life balance is really, really important. And learning new marketable skills, I thought that was interesting. Finding a way to get a full-time job again. Look how low this is. This is, and everyone in this room obviously knows that, and that's why you're in this industry. This is a disruption of the US workforce. And this is just a fundamental shift. And they're not just lost their job and trying to find another full-time job. They're just not interested in our previous generation's definition, or maybe even our generation's definition of work. So this was really interesting, trying to understand the psychological drivers on why you're an independent worker. So freedom, this keyword, again, freedom. Look at the size of this, and look at here. They don't want a full-time job. But there's some tough things here. So hard, painful, difficult, busy, confusing, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Unfamiliar, risky, scary, unstable, right? There's some fear here. And as an industry, I think we can do a better job altogether. So some of the issues, so we asked, what are your top 2 issues in being an independent contractor? So, I worry that there are more opportunities out there that I'm missing. That's really interesting. So it's not always that I'm just not making enough money. It's that there's other things that I could be doing that I actually might enjoy more. It's not just about earning an extra 50 cents an hour. I think that's a very, very important point. And I wish there was a way to get a unified view of all my freelance activity across the various resources. So the average worker that we brought into our qualitative study in New York in these focus groups in these meetups, we're working for 2 to 3 platforms. So they're might have a bicycle, that's their asset, and they're working for Uber Rush and Caviar and DoorDash, and they're carrying 3 bags and driving around New York City in this example. So again, it's very hard for them to be able to manage this. And moving on along very quickly, again, we want to get to the roundtable part. This was also really fascinating to me. So we think about very millennial heavy, right? Sort of this mobile first kind of app environment for on demand. So I really thought social media would be everything, right? Or the majority, but that's where they're finding it. Friends and family. So that goes back to, again, these keywords here. The psychological drivers, the difficulty, unfamiliar, the frustrating. So if we don't do a good job with these, sort of new to the on-demand economy workers, not only are they going to burn out and churn, and we're going to talk about that tonight, why is the average worker that we see, has been involved in the platform for like less than 2 weeks, right? So they're also not going to share it with their friends, and this is going to have a very negative effect on everything that we're doing. So social media was much lower than we thought. Classified ads like Craigslist was actually much higher than we thought. We thought that was kind of interesting. And if you look at like the job boards, again, lower than we thought. And the specific sites was quite low, and we're actually going to look at that in more detail in a moment. Any questions so far? I know I'm sharing a lot of data. Yes, if you could please speak loudly and share your name and your company name, please.
Oh, sure. I'm Ian McHenry from Beyond Pricing. The question was just, what again was the demographic? What was the mix of people in terms of what they do? Drivers, accountants,
sure.
Whatnot?
So we tried to take a fairly even mix of both, skilled, unskilled, again, not in a negative way, blue collar, white collar, and also age. We intentionally did not focus just on millennials. We actually wanted to get a more representative set of the U.S. workforce. So it was balanced, but it was fairly broad. So it was not just Uber drivers or not just accountants. It was actually designed to be fairly broad.
Just want to know that, because is that when you say white collar, what are those typical activities?
Sure.
Because that seems like where friends and family would be referred. Like, my wife's a lawyer, she works for herself, so I guess she'd be a freelancer.
Sure. So, professional managerial administrative remotely as freelance work, professional managerial administrative on site, creative services, sales and service, and then blue collar manual labor, delivery, ride sharing. But what's really interesting is when we did the qualitative study with the workers, and we asked them where you found about your current gig and the multiple gigs you have, it really, and that was very millennial heavy in the room, and it was 100%, it was a smaller sample size, but 100% in the on-demand economy today. And what was really interesting, it was almost all friends and family, and kind of social media in the same level, and everything else fell off. So what's interesting, and again, the qualitative study, which was a smaller sample size, still kind of flowed the same way, that this is referrals. And again, if we don't treat our independent workers well, it's going to have a negative ripple across everything that we do. And I think that is just hopefully an important takeaway for tonight. Any other questions so far? Yes, your name and your company, please. Nice and loud.
I'm John Gillen. I'm with Roost. Could you make any distinction between people who are making income actively versus passively? Because I can see some of the people who are afraid of missing other opportunities, and ones who are actively working their time for it versus renting out, extra space, cars, bedrooms.
Sure. So in this quantitative study, we didn't. And again, we wanted to get sort of a larger data set. In the qualitative study, those are more focused, because what was really interesting is the overwhelming majority, and I'd say 85–90% without looking at the specifics of those independent workers, again, very millennial focused, work for multiple platforms, and specifically on demand. Almost, if not the majority, all of their income actually came from the on-demand economy. And again, very, very similar feedback on not only do they feel that they're missing out on opportunities, we're going to dig into the quantitative data on their actually recognition with the various platforms, and it's pretty shocking how few platforms that they know. So it's interesting, so even though this was broader, and it had people in the freelance economy who might have had a full-time job doing a little freelance, and a mix of people who were kind of full-time and on-demand, it tracked very similar when we did, again, smaller data set, but the qualitative study in person. So I think, again, we would need a little bit more data, but it seems like directionally it's very similar. Yes, your name and your company, please.
I'm Musa from Lyft. I'm just surprised that friends and family is a big component, but I also think about how all of the on-demand companies offer a referral bonus to people who refer their friends and family, so that could potentially skew some of the results.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to drill into that a little bit. We have another focus group of the workers coming up in New York and here. That's a good question. That's going to be one of the questions that we ask, is that, how influenced were you by sort of a referral bonus or bounty that maybe you were getting or your friend was getting? I encourage it. That's a really good point. Yes?
Hey, Howie. Jonathan Duar, work for Good Hire, a 3-point background check company. And the numbers you see on the referral side almost exactly mimic what you see in normal hiring. From referrals to friends and family to job boards or a little bit down the road. But that's statistically over the last 20 years is very similar.
Interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see over time if on-demand, since it's such a disruption of the workforce, we'll see if that shifts or maybe that kind of tracks the same. Okay, great. So this was really interesting. So I'm going to go with sort of the lowest concern that the independent worker had. So when we started thinking about this study during the summer, I'm like, healthcare must be a pretty big concern. And this actually scored quite low. And when we did the qualitative study with the first set of workers in our office, when we asked the room about health insurance, there was 3 individuals who were on Medicaid, which is typically at that point they didn't have a disability, so at that point it's typically lower income level, right? And the rest of the room actually had no insurance. And I'm like, so what are you guys thinking? They're like, well, we just hope we're okay. And we just hope it's going to be okay. And that's kind of scary, and I think as an industry we need to think a little bit about that. And again, this broader quantitative study with larger sample size, again, is kind of directionally pointing in a similar way. And again, I really would have thought that this was like a huge concern, and it's not, which means that they're either truly not concerned about it, they don't know about the options, or they're just stuck and not sure what to do. And I think it's we're going to dig in a little bit more. Yes, sir.
I'm Jay. I'm with Jug. How does this data reflect, like, between the white collar versus the blue collar?
Sure. So this here is actually the overall study, and so we didn't break out white collar versus blue collar. We dug in a little bit in the cohorts into if you were psyched, unhappy, or neutral. So more attitudinal. We did not slice this blue collar versus white collar, but we could take a look at that data offline too. Let's see, where was I? So the customer feedback and ratings were very important, and I think that also depends on what vertical the independent workers in. If they're working more in the freelance economy on an Upwork or site such as that, that's obviously very important. The ratings are front and center. If they're working in Uber, obviously that's your Lyft. Obviously that's going to be very important for the ratings too. So what's interesting to me is tracking income and expenses was very high in the quantitative study, and I thought that might have been a function of sort of looking at more a blend of white collar, right? Skilled versus unskilled. But again, directionally, this tracked really well to where we were with the quantitative study, and we when we talked with the workers one-on-one in a small group. What was interesting is first, it didn't come up as a big concern, accounting, because we didn't present it. In this study, in this survey, we presented multiple things and they ranked them. We just asked them in the qualitative study, It didn't come up. And then when we phrased the question like, oh, how are you guys handling, you got these 1099s, what do you think about taxes? It just blank stares, and they're like, we have no idea. So what was interesting is that they, again, weren't owning up that this is going to be an issue for them. I think in the same way that insurance, but in the quantitative study, it actually tracked quite high. So this to me this blew me away. So my apologies for everyone in the room. I got a lot of flack in New York. Why isn't my company up there? Why is my company up there? It's rated low or high or whatever. So we intentionally did not include Uber and Airbnb and Lyft. So those are three that we actually excluded just based on brand recognition. And again, this was actually designed by an independent research firm, so we didn't pick the name, so you can't blame me. So this, was interesting. So again, because since this had a mix of traditional freelance and on-demand, that's why Odesk actually ranked high here. And this was different when we did this with the worker focus group of the on-demand economy. It was really low recognition for Odesk. But if you look here, so there's a little recognition in TaskRabbit, and it kind of goes down here. So we get into the qualitative meetup in New York, and so we put 10 companies up on the list and say who's worked for them, went through the list, or who knows of them, hands down. And they were like, this is crazy. So we actually put 20 companies from the platforms that we're actively working with, and I got to tell you, beyond Thumbtack and TaskRabbit, again, I'm not picking on individual companies or not, I'm just sharing data. The recognition was super low, like one person would know it, two people would know it. So these are workers, when we started to explain, like, hey, what do these platforms do? They'd love to work with you guys. They actually don't know overall in the industry, and they're directly in it. So I thought that was really fascinating. And again, this directionally fits with what even the direct qualitative on-demand group. So I'm getting the 1 minute a minute signal. I'm probably over as usual, but let's go. So it's 3 seconds. Sorry. So in summary, so look, the market, and we're all sitting here for this reason, it's at a turning point in consumer adoption, in addition to what we're seeing in the workers. More gigs, more tenure equals more satisfaction. The satisfaction part is so important, and we're going to spend some more time talking about this, for the rest of the year, that we need happy workers, right? We just can't churn them through this system. Making money, maximizing revenue is a key important factor. We know that. Work-life balance is important. Learning new skills is important. The psychological drivers, desire for independence and freedom, balance against hard and challenging work. So it's interesting. So just because something's hard and challenging doesn't mean it's bad, right? And it goes against some of what the studies are saying about millennials, and they don't want hard work. They do. They want to be challenged, but they want freedom. Missed opportunities, huge issue. They want more opportunities. The brand recognition is really low. And they want to see a unified view of their activities. It's a pain point, and this is much scarier to be an independent worker and go out in a car, go and pick something up, than showing up for a full-time job and sitting through 3 days of orientation. This is hard, scary stuff, right? And resources. This is they're learning from friends and family, which means we have to do a good job. So, Joe, do I have time for a question? No? All right, so questions later.
Howie, nice job.
Thanks, guys.